The house was too still. No music, no clatter, not even the hum of conversation. Just the soft click of utensils as Dana placed the casserole dish at the center of the table like it was a peace offering. "You just relax tonight, Marlene," she said, brushing invisible dust from her sleeves. "Let us take care of everything." Owen didn't speak. He sat down slowly, folding his napkin with more focus than necessary. Across from me, Elsie picked at her salad, her eyes flicking from my face to the space under my plate and back again. I reached for my water glass and felt something papery under the corner of my napkin. I kept my fingers steady as I slid it free. It was a torn sheet from a school notebook. I unfolded it in my lap heart, already stuttering before I read the words. "Pretend you're sick and leave. Now." The room tilted slightly. I looked up. Elsie's hands were clenched in her lap. Her face was pale, her bottom lip pinched between her teeth. She nodded, once small, urgent. I pushed back my chair. I think I need to lie down," I said, pressing my palm to my forehead. Suddenly, very dizzy. Dana didn't rise. "You're probably just tired. We'll save you a plate." I nodded and stepped into the hallway. My knees were weaker than I expected. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and froze. Owen was leaning toward Dana, whispering low. Her head tilted slightly, and she laughed. "She'll be out by the weekend anyway." The words landed like a stone. I didn't go upstairs. I turned and walked to the study instead. The door was open. On the desk, a briefcase was unzipped, papers fanned out neatly across the surface. There on top, a title transfer form. A deed. My name. My signature. I hadn't signed this. I hadn't even seen it until now. I parked 2 blocks from the school and waited where the shade reached across the pavement. The last bell hadn't rung yet, but I saw Elsie already walking toward me. She didn't look back. She opened the car door and slid in quickly. No words at first, just her bag at her feet and her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You read it?" she asked. I nodded. She looked straight ahead. "They don't think I hear things." "But I do. Last night they were in the kitchen again, arguing. About what deadlines. Dana said the buyer wants the house before June. Owen said they can't finalize until the title clears." She paused. "They said you already signed it. Last month." My chest tightened. "I did sign something a few weeks ago. A man with a clipboard, neat and polite. Dana said it was insurance paperwork, nothing urgent." I didn't have my glasses. I trusted them. I pulled into the parking lot of a fast food place and turned off the engine. The car ticked in the silence. I dialed the county records office. The clerk was polite. "The parcel still shows Marlene Doran as the legal owner," she said. "But a quit-claim deed was submitted. Processing takes 48 hours. I hung up before the bile could reach my throat. I called my lawyer's office. Straight to voicemail. Beside me, Elsie reached across the console and took my hand. I didn't realize how cold mine had become until hers closed around it. Neither of us spoke for a while. My name was still on the deed for now, but not for long. I squeezed her hand once before letting go. "We're not going home," I said. "Not yet." I started the car again, steering it toward the neighborhood where Elsie's best friend lived. I knew her mother well enough to ask for 1 night of help, maybe 2. Enough time to figure out what I still had control over and what had already slipped through my fingers. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the list in my mind had grown. At the top, find out if Dana kept a copy. I dropped Elsie at her friend's house just after 6. I told her friend's mother we had a plumbing leak and needed a night to sort things. She didn't ask questions, just smiled and said, "She can stay as long as she needs." I circled the block twice before heading back to my house. I didn't park out front. I left the car tucked 2 streets away and walked along the edge of the fence line. Dana's mother's sedan was already in the driveway. From the side yard, I crouched by the slats in the fence and looked through. The patio lights were on. Dana and her mother were sitting with wine glasses, barefoot, relaxed. "She's stubborn," Dana said. "But if she thinks it was for her benefit, she won't fight it." Her mother chuckled. "She'll end up in one of those senior condos. Something with an elevator and soft music." They clinked glasses like it was already settled. I moved quietly along the side, ducked beneath the back windows, and slipped around to the basement entrance. The spare key was still taped behind the light fixture, just where Owen left it years ago. The lock turned with barely a click. I didn't turn on a single light. Upstairs, their footsteps were faint. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. In the guest room downstairs, the room they never used, I pulled open the bottom drawer of the dresser. I had kept a backup folder there once back before the lockbox. It was full again. My will, copies of my ID, bank information, letters from the credit union, the medical directive I wrote with my attorney 2 years ago, all pulled from my locked metal box. The one I hadn't touched in months. They were trying to recreate my consent on paper, make it look like I handed everything over freely. On top of the stack sat the deed again, my name, my signature. But the letters looked strained, like they'd been traced slowly, unnaturally. I took out my phone. Steady hands. Flash off. I snapped photos of every page before sliding them back where I found them. Then I listened. Upstairs, the blender turned on. I didn't stop to think. I just drove. Erin's condo lights were still on when I pulled up, even though it was nearly 9. She opened the door in socks and a sweatshirt that read, "Retired, but still right." Her reading glasses were perched on her head. She took one look at me and stepped aside. "Come in. Sit." I handed her my phone without speaking. She sat beside me on the couch, flipped through the photos slowly, her expression fixed. "You didn't sign this," she said after a minute. "This isn't your stroke pattern. See this curve here? That's someone tracing, probably from a scan." I felt my chest hollow out. "Is that forgery?" "If the signature isn't yours," she said, "it's fraud." She stood and disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back, her laptop was already booting up. "We'll file a stop transfer request with the county recorder's office. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to submit in person. Once that's in, they can't record the transfer until the fraud review clears." She printed a form, then another. "This one's a temporary injunction, just in case they try anything while it's under review." The printer whirred in the background. Erin handed me a pen. "You'll need ID notarization and physical delivery. But this buys you time." I nodded, too tired to answer. She offered me her guest room. I accepted without protest. But after she went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I sat out on her small porch, the metal chair creaking under me, as I stared out at the stillness of her neighborhood. A neighbor's wind chime knocked gently in the dark. My house. My house was 10 minutes away, but I couldn't go back to it. Not without feeling like a stranger in someone else's story. In the morning, I would stand in line at the county building. I would hand over papers and signatures and hope that proof still meant something. Tonight, I just sat there, holding a copy of the form in my lap, like it was the only thing still connecting me to what I used to own. I arrived at the recorder's office just before the doors opened. The lobby was already filling with quiet bodies, clutching folders, manila envelopes, cups of burnt coffee. I held mine tight, 3 printed copies of the stop transfer form, my signed affidavit, the photos of the forged signature, and a copy of my driver's license. Every detail double-checked, every paper clipped in place. At 7:42 a.m., I stepped up to the counter and slid the envelope across. The clerk wore a patterned tie and a neutral expression. He flipped through everything quickly, then reached for the red date stamp. "You've bought time," he said, pressing down, "at least until the fraud review is complete." I nodded and stepped away before my knees betrayed me. Outside, I sat in my car, staring at the dash for a few minutes before I remembered what I needed to do next. I called Owen. Voicemail. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. I didn't leave a message. I tried Dana's workplace. The receptionist said she wasn't in today. By the time I got back to Aaron's, I had already drafted the email in my head. I typed it out slowly, carefully reading it twice before hitting send. I've submitted a fraud complaint with the county. The property transfer is under investigation. Any further attempt to access my documents or accounts will be treated as criminal trespass. That was it. No emotion, no accusation, just facts. They didn't reply. Not that day. Aaron was out volunteering, so I made myself a sandwich I didn't finish and left the dishes soaking in the sink. I took a long bath in her narrow tub, letting the water go lukewarm around me before I moved. Later that night, I sat at her kitchen table with a notepad and pen. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What stays with me?" I didn't finish the list, but the first 3 lines were clear. My name, my proof, my granddaughter. I folded the paper once and tucked it into my purse. Tomorrow I'd go back to the house. Not to argue, just to reclaim what was still mine. 3 days later, I returned with Aaron and a uniformed officer. The driveway was empty except for Dana's car. Owen was nowhere in sight. I knocked once before letting myself in with the key I still legally held. Dana was in the kitchen, standing barefoot sipping coffee from one of my old mugs. She opened her mouth likely to say something smug until she spotted the officer behind me. "I'm here to retrieve my personal property," I said calmly. "I've given written notice, and I've filed a fraud claim with the county." Her lips tightened. "You can't prove anything," she said, folding her arms like she was bracing for wind. I didn't answer. I walked past her and headed downstairs, the officer following 2 steps behind. In the guest room, things had been shifted again. The chrome toaster I'd noticed last time was gone. My old chipped tea kettle had returned to the countertop. They were trying to make it look like nothing had changed, like none of it had ever happened, but they hadn't touched the wastebasket. Inside, I found torn pages shredded on the diagonal, the way Dana always used to do when throwing out junk mail. But this wasn't junk. It was pages of my handwriting. Grocery lists, a holiday letter, a birthday card from a friend with a line I'd written beneath in my own hand. Gone, or nearly. I retrieved each piece, placing them gently into a Ziploc bag I'd brought for exactly this. Then I opened the closet and found my old lockbox. Empty. Back upstairs, I walked slowly through the hallway. The family photos had been removed. The wall where Owen's graduation picture used to hang now held a generic canvas print, birch trees, in mist, no faces, no names. I stood there for a long time, longer than I meant to. Then I turned, said thank you to the officer, and walked out of the house without looking back. That night, Aaron made us tea, and I told Elsie she wouldn't need to go back either. Not even for her clothes. The call came just before noon. I recognized the number from the school, but still held my breath when I answered. "Mrs. Doran, this is Camille Reeves, the counselor at Ridgeview." My heart jumped. "Is everything all right?" She paused gently. "Elsie hasn't been home for several days, according to her records. We just needed to confirm where she's staying." I exhaled. "She's with me. I picked her up last week." "I thought so," Ms. Reeves said. "She asked if she could list your address in case of any future concerns." She said she felt safest with you. I didn't say much more. Just thank you, and I'd be there soon. When I arrived at the school, Elsie was already waiting in the office with her backpack hugged to her chest. The moment she saw me, she stood and wrapped her arms around me. She didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. Back at Aaron's, we made boxed macaroni and cheese and watched 2 episodes of a baking competition. Aaron sat with us pretending not to get overly invested in the results. For a while, the house felt like something close to normal. After dinner, Elsie handed me a paper. "It's for class," she said. "But I'm not sure I want to turn it in." It was an essay. Title, What I Know That No One Believes. She had written about overhearing things grown-ups talking after bedtime, voices in the kitchen, laughter that didn't sound kind, about seeing her mother go through my drawers, about watching me walk down the hall while someone whispered I'd be out by the weekend. The last line of the page said, "Sometimes grown-ups lie in whispers and call it planning." I folded the paper and placed it gently on the table. Then I reached over and held her hand. "We're not going back," I told her. "Not to visit, not to explain, not even for a pair of socks." She didn't cry. She just nodded, and for the first time in days, she leaned her head on my shoulder. The envelope from the county came on a Monday, but I'd already expected the request. Inside was a formal notice asking me to appear for a signature comparison session. Aaron drove me to the office and waited in the hallway while I sat with the fraud team in a quiet, neutral room. I laid out what I'd brought: copies of tax returns from the past 5 years, greeting cards I'd written to Elsie, even an old letter from my first mortgage company. They examined the loops, the pressure marks, the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's. I sat still as they photographed each sample and compared it with the forged deed I'd submitted. No one spoke much, just the soft clicks of cameras and the quiet rustle of paper. A week later, I received the summary report. Significant inconsistencies found. Fraud confirmed. That sentence didn't make me cry. It didn't make me angry either. It just settled something. The investigator said a criminal complaint was optional, but I'd already gone a different route. Aaron had helped me file a civil suit for the theft of my lockbox contents, unauthorized use of personal information, and attempted fraudulent transfer of property. She also helped me draft the final letter. We printed 2 copies on plain white paper and mailed them certified. Effective immediately, your access to my home, financial accounts, and estate is revoked in full. All further contact must go through legal counsel. There were no apologies in the wording, no invitations for discussion, just closure. I didn't wait for a reply, and none came. That afternoon, I returned Elsie's essay to her folder and called the locksmith. He came out the next day to rekey Aaron's front door and install a new deadbolt. We weren't moving yet, but I wanted one place in the world to feel like it couldn't be taken from us. Later that night, I sat at the dining table with my tea, the county report folded neatly beside me. My name was still my own. My signature, too. And by morning, so was my next step. Aaron rode in the passenger seat while the movers followed behind. The rental cottage was smaller than anything I'd lived in before, but when we turned down the gravel lane and saw the porch wrapped in ivy, I felt something settle in my chest. It was enough. We spent the first day unpacking, only what mattered. Aaron helped me string a wind chime outside the kitchen window. I hung one photograph on the living room wall, just one. It was me and Elsie at the Science Museum, both of us wearing paper crowns from the gift shop, her smile wide and mine unguarded. Elsie came every Saturday. She brought books from the library, baking mixes we never quite got right, and stories from school that made me laugh, even when I didn't mean to. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a thick envelope propped against the front door. Inside was a letter from Dana's lawyer. No greeting, no apology, just a formal release they had dropped all claims to the property. The house, the deed, the contents. It was over. I stood there for a moment, the letter in one hand, the silence in the other. I didn't call Aaron. I didn't call anyone. I made tea, sat on the porch, and listened to the soft ring of the wind chime catching in the breeze. The house was quiet again. The one they tried to take, but it wasn't mine anymore, and I realized I didn't want it back. Some places, no matter how deeply you loved them, became hollow after a certain kind of silence. After someone looked at you like a burden after you overheard your goodbye drafted in advance. I folded the lawyer's letter and tucked it away. Not out of sentiment, just for record keeping. When Elsie arrived that weekend, she sat beside me on the porch and handed me a new book. She swung her legs gently, her feet brushing the wood floor in slow, thoughtful arcs. And I realized her seat on the right side of the bench, always the right side, was where I had placed my hope. The note sits in a simple wooden frame on my bookshelf next to a row of old paperbacks. The paper is creased, a little yellowed at the corners, but the pencil marks are still clear enough to read. Pretend you're sick and leave. Now, I can see her small, hurried handwriting every time I glance that way. I've memorized the way she formed her letters, the way the N tilts to the right, like it was written mid-breath. Some mornings, when I take the long road into town, I pass the old house. The curtains are always drawn. The yard looks tidy, cared for by someone new. I don't slow down. I keep driving until the past feels like it's in another town altogether. The library sits near the corner where the park meets Main Street. I started volunteering there 2 months after the move. It began with filing books, then turned into something else. The director asked if I'd help with the literacy group people who needed guidance, filling out forms, reading letters, writing their names again, after years of letting others do it for them. Sometimes I sit with someone who's never signed anything that was truly their own. I show them how to write slowly to make it theirs. I watch them lift the pen and claim space on the page. Other days, I help an older woman draft a letter to her granddaughter. She tells me she hasn't seen her in years, but wants to say thank you anyway. I tell her that's enough. At home, my desk holds one document I've rewritten 3 times my will. At the bottom, beneath my signature, I added a single line in pen. No signature or form shall be valid unless verified twice with kindness and care. It's a small rule, but it's mine, because trust once broken deserves better terms the next time it's offered. Not again.